Chapter 1. A Forgotten Soul. The Shadows of Draven Station. In the far reaches of the galaxy, where order was a concept more than a reality, Draven Station stood as a monument to chaos. A labyrinthine network of interconnected modules, its sprawling bulk clung to the remnants of a shattered moon orbiting the dying star Solaran B-12. The station, an ever-pulsing hive of smugglers, traders, mercenaries, and wanderers, thrived on the fringes of law. It was a place where wealth and desperation existed side by side, where the powerful wielded their influence with cruelty and the weak were invisible. The underbelly of Draven Station, known as the Rigs, was a maze of narrow, dimly lit corridors filled with the stench of decay and the hum of overworked air filtration systems. This was where hope came to die, where those cast out by society huddled in shadows, surviving on scraps and fading dreams. Among the forgotten was Irina, a young woman of the Sholtari species. Her people were once revered for their beauty, their shimmering, iridescent skin resembling polished gemstones. But Irina's once brilliant orange hue had faded to a dull, ashen gray, her body thin and frail from months of starvation. Her emerald eyes, which once sparkled with life, now carried only exhaustion and a flicker of defiance. Draped in tattered cloth, Irina sat slumped against the rusted wall of an alley in the Rigs, her knees pulled to her chest. Her fingers, long and delicate, clutched a small, broken data tablet, a relic from better days. The station's distant rumble vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder of the bustling world above that had no place for her. A desperate proposition. The sound of footsteps echoed down the alley, drawing Irina's attention. She raised her head slowly, her muscles aching from days of immobility. A group of men approached, their laughter crude and their intentions obvious. They were human, their faces shadowed by the dim light. "Well, well," said one of them, his voice dripping with mockery. "What do we have here? A pretty little Sholtari all by herself?" Irina's heart sank, but she forced herself to meet their gaze. She had nothing to lose. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse. "I just need food. Anything." The leader of the group, a man with a scar running down his cheek, smirked. "And what's a starving alien got to offer in return? You've got nothing." Irina swallowed hard, her pride crumbling under the weight of desperation. I can give you something," she said, her voice trembling. "Anything you want. Just, please." The men exchanged glances, their laughter growing louder. "Anything, huh?" the scarred man said, stepping closer. "Not interested, sweetheart. You look like you'd keel over before we could even enjoy ourselves." Irina's face burned with shame as the group turned and walked away, their mocking laughter echoing in her ears. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Even in her desperation, she was invisible. A chance encounter. Hours passed, the cold metal floor leaching what little warmth remained in Irina's body. She closed her eyes, letting her thoughts drift to her homeworld, Sholdar Prime, a lush, vibrant planet that now existed only in memory. The war that had destroyed her people left her as one of the few survivors, scattered across the galaxy like debris from a shattered ship. The sound of approaching footsteps jolted her from her thoughts. This time, they were heavier, deliberate. She opened her eyes to see a human man standing at the entrance of the alley. He was tall, his frame sturdy beneath a worn leather jacket. His face was weathered, marked by lines that spoke of hardship and resilience, and his sharp blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The man crouched in front of her, his expression unreadable. "You look like you're about to keel over," he said, his voice deep but not unkind. Irina's throat was too dry to speak. She simply nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground. The man sighed and reached into the bag slung over his shoulder. He pulled out a ration bar and a small canister of water, placing them on the ground in front of her. "Here, eat." Her eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, she hesitated, as if afraid it was a cruel joke. But when the man made no move to take the food back, she grabbed the ration bar and tore into it with trembling hands. The taste was bland, but to her, it was ambrosia. The man watched her silently, his eyes softening. "What's your name?" he asked. "Irina," she managed between bites. "Ethan," he said simply, leaning back against the wall. What's a Sholtari doing in a place like this? Her chewing slowed, and she glanced at him warily. Surviving. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Not much of a life, is it? No, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. An unlikely offer. Ethan stayed silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the distant glow of the main levels above. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured. I run a small salvage crew. We operate out of the outer rings of the station. It's not much, but it's honest work. If you're willing to put in the effort, I can give you a place on the crew. Irina stared at him, her mind racing. Was this another cruel trick? A promise that would lead to more humiliation and pain? But something in Ethan's demeanor, the steadiness of his gaze, the sincerity in his voice made her want to believe him. Why would you help me? She asked, her voice filled with suspicion. Ethan shrugged. Because I've been where you are. Maybe not exactly, but close enough. Everyone deserves a second chance. Tears stung Irina's eyes, but she blinked them away. The thought of leaving the shadows of the rigs, of having a purpose again, felt like a lifeline she couldn't ignore. I'll work, she said, her voice firm despite her trembling hands. I'll do whatever it takes. Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. All right then, let's get you cleaned up. You're going to need your strength. A glimmer of hope. As Ethan helped her to her feet, Irina felt a flicker of hope ignite within her for the first time in years. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. Together, they left the alley and stepped into the neon-lit streets of Draven Station, their silhouettes casting long shadows as they walked toward an uncertain but promising future. Chapter 2. A Second Chance. Arrival at the salvage ship. Ethan guided Irina through the crowded main levels of Draven Station, where neon lights flickered and the noise of vendors, mechanics, and travelers filled the air. The stark contrast between the bustling crowds and the desolation of the rigs was overwhelming to her. She clutched the frayed cloak around her shoulders, feeling exposed under the curious stares of passers-by. Ethan walked a step ahead, his confident stride making it clear he was no stranger to the chaotic station. Not much farther, Ethan said over his shoulder. Our ship's docked in the outer bay. Irina glanced around, her sharp senses catching glimpses of other beings who, like her, seemed out of place. Sholtari were rare in these parts, and the few who had survived the destruction of their homeworld rarely revealed their identity. She felt a pang of unease at the thought of being recognized. Her people's collapse was a tragedy, but to scavengers and slavers, it was an opportunity. When they reached Docking Bay 47, Irina's eyes widened. Ethan's ship, the Solstice, wasn't a sleek or powerful vessel like the one she remembered from Shuldar Prime. It was a patchwork of salvaged parts, its hull scarred by countless spacefaring adventures. Yet, there was something endearing about its rugged appearance. It was a ship built for resilience. It's not pretty, Ethan admitted with a grin, catching her expression, but it gets the job done. He led her up the loading ramp, the faint hiss of pressurized air welcoming them into the ship's interior. The main deck was cluttered with tools, crates of spare parts, and pieces of half-dismantled machinery. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal, a scent Irina found oddly comforting. From a nearby console, a sharp voice called out, "You're late, Carter." A woman stepped into view, her short hair streaked with silver and her sharp eyes narrowing at Irina. Kara, Ethan's second-in-command, looked every bit the no-nonsense leader. She crossed her arms, her gaze flicking between Ethan and the unfamiliar Sholtari. "And who's this?" Kara asked, her tone suspicious. "This is Irina," Ethan replied. "She's joining the crew." Kara's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, really? Did we suddenly become a charity? We barely have enough resources for the crew we've got." "She'll earn her keep," Ethan said firmly. "And she's been through enough already." Kara snorted, but didn't argue further. Instead, she addressed Irina directly. "If you're going to stick around, you pull your weight. No freeloaders on this ship." Irina nodded, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'll work." Kara's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "We'll see." Learning the ropes. The days that followed were grueling. Ethan assigned Irina to work alongside Kara in the engineering bay, where the ship's outdated systems required constant maintenance. The tasks were tedious and physically demanding, But Irina threw herself into the work with determination. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a purpose, a reason to keep going. Kara remained skeptical at first, but as the days turned into weeks, she began to see Irina's potential. Despite her frail appearance, the Sholtari woman was quick to learn and unafraid to get her hands dirty. "You've got a knack for this," Kara admitted one evening as they worked to repair a malfunctioning power conduit. Most people would have given up by now. Irina glanced at her, surprised by the compliment. "I don't have the luxury of giving up." Kara nodded, a hint of respect in her expression. "Good. Keep it that way." Building trust. While Irina earned her place on the crew, her connection with Ethan deepened. He often sought her out during breaks, sharing stories of his past and listening to hers. Their conversations were a balm for Irina's soul, a reminder that she wasn't alone in the universe. One evening, as they sat in the ship's lounge, Ethan asked her a question that had been on his mind since they met. "Why didn't you leave Draven Station sooner?" he asked gently. "Someone like you could have found a better place to start over." Irina stared at the floor, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. "After the war, after Sholdar Prime fell, I had nowhere to go. The station was the only place that didn't turn me away, even if it meant living in the shadows. I thought, maybe I deserved it." Ethan frowned. "Deserved what?" "To be forgotten," she said quietly. "For surviving when so many didn't." Ethan reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You didn't choose to survive, Irina, but you're here now, and you have a chance to rebuild. Don't let the past take that away from you." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her guilt begin to lift. A new threat. The fragile peace aboard the Solstice was shattered one morning when the ship's proximity alarms blared, jolting the crew from their sleep. "Unidentified vessel approaching," Kara reported from the bridge. "Looks like a slaver ship." Ethan cursed under his breath. "Of course. They must have tracked us from Draven Station." Irina's blood ran cold. The thought of being captured by slavers, of being dragged back to the life she had barely escaped, was unbearable. "We're not letting them board," Ethan said firmly. "Kara, prepare the weapons system. Irina, stay in engineering and keep the shields operational." Irina nodded, her fear tempered by determination. She wouldn't let her past claim her again. The first fight. As the slaver ship closed in, the Solstice shuddered under the impact of their first attack. Ethan and Kara worked together to return fire, their combined expertise keeping the enemy at bay. In the engineering bay, Irina fought to maintain the ship's shields, her fingers flying over the console as alarms blared around her. "Shields at 40%, she called over the comms. "I need more power to stabilize them." "We're working on it," Kara replied, her voice strained. The battle raged on, each blast rocking the ship and pushing the crew to their limits. But despite the odds, they refused to give up. With a final, well-placed shot from the Solstice's main cannon, the slaver ship was crippled, its engines sputtering as it drifted into the void. "Good work, everyone," Ethan said over the comms, his voice filled with relief. "Irina, how are the shields?" "Stable," she replied, her voice shaky but triumphant. "We're safe for now." A bond forged in fire. As the crew regrouped in the lounge, the tension slowly eased. Kara clapped Irina on the shoulder, a rare smile on her face. "You held your own out there. I'm impressed." "Thanks," Irina said, a small smile forming on her lips. "I had a good teacher." Ethan sat beside her, his blue eyes filled with pride. "You did more than hold your own, Irina. You proved you belong here." For the first time in years, Irina felt a sense of belonging, of being part of something greater than herself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Ethan and the crew of the Solstice by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges awaited. Chapter 3. The Ghosts of the Past. A moment of respite. The battle with the slavers left the Solstice battered but functional. As the ship drifted through the safety of a neutral trade corridor, the crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage. Irina found herself in the engineering bay, her hands deftly repairing one of the shield generators that had taken the brunt of the attack. The steady hum of the ship surrounded her, a comforting reminder that they had survived another day. Ethan entered the room, his expression weary but relieved. "How's it coming along?" Irina wiped her hands on a rag and glanced up, The generator's operational again, but it won't handle another hit like that. We need parts to make a proper repair. Ethan nodded. We'll dock at Havenport in a day or two. It's a neutral hub, should be safe enough for us to resupply. Irina's gaze lingered on him, her voice soft. Do you think they'll come after us again? Ethan leaned against the bulkhead, his blue eyes meeting hers. Slavers are persistent, but they're not stupid. After the beating we gave them, they'll think twice before trying again. Irina nodded, though a lingering unease remained. The slavers weren't the only ghosts from her past, and she knew the galaxy had a way of dragging you back into the darkness just when you thought you were free. Havenport. Havenport was a sprawling, multi-tiered trade station nestled in the orbit of a dying gas giant. Its neon-lit streets were filled with traders, mercenaries, and travelers from across the galaxy. To the crew of the Solstice, it was a chance to rest, resupply, and gather intel. Ethan led the way through the bustling market, his sharp gaze scanning the crowd. Kara stayed close, her ever-watchful eyes darting to potential threats. Irina followed a step behind, her hood pulled low to obscure her face. Despite the station's neutral status, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As they reached a vendor selling spare parts, Ethan struck up a conversation with the shopkeeper, haggling over prices. Irina wandered a few steps away, drawn to a small stall displaying intricate alien jewelry. The delicate pieces reminded her of home of the vibrant marketplaces of Sholdar Prime, where her people's laughter had once filled the air. Her reverie was broken by a sharp voice behind her. Well, what's a Sholtari doing this far from home? Irina froze, her heart pounding. She turned slowly to see a figure cloaked in dark armor, his reptilian features marked by scars. A Trilaxian, one of the galaxy's most notorious bounty hunter species. I'm just passing through, Irina said carefully, keeping her voice steady. The Trilaxian smirked, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Not many of your kind left. Makes you a rare commodity. Someone might pay a pretty price for you. Before Irina could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his presence commanding. Is there a problem here? The Trilaxian's eyes narrowed. And who are you? Someone you don't want to mess with, Ethan replied, his tone icy. Walk away. For a tense moment, the two men stared each other down. Then the Trilaxian sneered and turned away, disappearing into the crowd. You all right? Ethan asked, his voice softer now. Irina nodded, though her hands trembled. Thank you. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Let's stick together from now on. A dangerous revelation. Back aboard the Solstice, the crew gathered in the lounge to discuss their next move. The encounter with the Trilaxian had left them all on edge, and Kara was the first to voice her concerns. Bounty hunters don't just pick fights for no reason, she said, her arms crossed. If he knew what you are, Irina, it means someone's put a price on your head. Irina lowered her gaze, guilt gnawing at her. It's possible. After the fall of Sholdar Prime, survivors like me were hunted. Some were taken as slaves. Others, worse. Ethan's jaw tightened. Why didn't you tell us this earlier? I didn't want to put you at risk, Irina said, her voice barely above a whisper. You've already done so much for me. Ethan shook his head. You're part of this crew now. Whatever danger you're in, we'll face it together. Kara sighed. That's noble and all, but we can't fight off every bounty hunter in the galaxy. We need a plan. I know someone who might help, Ethan said after a moment of thought. An old contact of mine, Rin Voss. He's a data broker with access to underground networks. If there's a bounty on Irina, he'll know who placed it and why. Kara frowned. Voss is a shady character. Are you sure we can trust him? Not entirely, Ethan admitted, but he owes me a favor. It's worth the risk. A web of lies. The crew set a course for Carax's station, a seedy outpost on the fringes of galactic law. Rin Voss operated out of a hidden enclave there, his influence stretching across countless criminal and corporate networks. When they arrived, Ethan and Irina ventured into the station's underbelly while Kara and the rest of the crew stayed aboard the ship, ready to provide backup if needed. The air inside the station was thick with smoke and tension, the kind of place where danger lurked around every corner. Voss's enclave was a dimly lit room filled with holographic displays and rows of encrypted servers. The man himself was a wiry figure with cybernetic implants covering half his face. His sharp, Calculating eyes lit up when he saw Ethan. Carter, Voss said, his voice smooth. It's been a while. Not long enough, Ethan replied. We need information. Voss's gaze shifted to Irina, and his lips curled into a sly smile. Ah, a Shultari. Now I see why you came to me. There's a bounty on her, Ethan said bluntly. Who placed it? Voss leaned back in his chair, his cybernetic fingers tapping on the desk. Bounties on Shultari are rare these days. Most of your kind were wiped out or enslaved after the war. Irina flinched at his words, but Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Voss continued, his tone thoughtful. But in this case, it's not about money. Someone powerful wants her alive. My guess? They think she has something they need? What? Ethan demanded. Voss shrugged. That's for you to find out. But whoever's after her won't stop until they get it. You'll need to disappear and fast. Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. A dangerous choice. The air in Rinvoss's enclave felt heavy with tension. The revelation that someone powerful wanted Irina alive wasn't surprising, but it left more questions than answers. Ethan's sharp blue eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his tone urgent. Voss, I don't have time for riddles. Who's behind this? Voss smirked, his cybernetic implants glinting in the dim light. Information like that doesn't come cheap, Carter. You know how this works. Ethan clenched his jaw, the vein in his temple pulsing. You owe me, Rin. Or have you forgotten who got you out of that mess on Torvalis Prime? Voss sighed dramatically, drumming his fingers on the desk. Fine, fine. But don't say I never did you a favor. The bounty wasn't placed by slavers or bounty hunters. It was issued by Zelker Industries. Irina's head shot up, her emerald eyes wide. Zelker? There. A biotech corporation. Why would they want me? Voss tilted his head, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on her. That's the interesting part. They're not after you because of what you are, they're after you because of what's inside you. What does that mean? Ethan demanded. Voss leaned back, his expression smug. The Shultari weren't just victims of war, Carter. They were engineered to survive. Your friend here isn't just a refugee. She's carrying genetic data from her species. The kind of data that could be used to recreate Shultari biology or weaponize it. Irina's breath hitched, her hands trembling. That's impossible. I'm no one. Not to Zelker, Voss said, his tone almost sympathetic. To them, you're a gold mine. Hunted. Ethan and Irina left Voss's enclave with their minds racing. Back aboard the Solstice, Kara's face darkened as Ethan relayed the information. So now we know why they're after her, Kara said. But knowing doesn't solve our problem. Zelker isn't going to stop until they get what they want. Ethan paced the deck, his hands on his hips. Then we make sure they don't get her. We need to get her off the grid, somewhere Zelker can't find her. Irina shook her head, her voice trembling. You don't understand. If what Voss said is true, I'm not safe anywhere. And if they find me, they'll use me to hurt others. Then we make sure they don't find you, Ethan said firmly. The ship's proximity alarms blared, cutting off the conversation. Kara rushed to the console, her sharp eyes scanning the incoming data. Multiple ships incoming, she reported. It's Zelker. They found us. Ethan cursed under his breath. How many? 3 frigates, Kara replied grimly. We can't take them in a fight. Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Then we don't fight. We run. The escape. The Solstice roared to life, its engines flaring as it broke free from the docking clamps. The sleek Zelker frigates gave chase, their weapons lighting up the void with deadly precision. The crew braced as the ship shook under the impact of incoming fire. I can't outrun them in a straight line, Kara called from the pilot's seat. We need a plan, and fast. Ethan turned to Irina, his expression intense. Do you trust me? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Good, Ethan said. Kara, head for the nearest nebula. We'll lose them in the interference. Kara's eyes widened. The Tyrell Rift? That place is a death trap. It's our best shot, Ethan replied. Do it. The Solstice veered sharply, its engines straining as it plunged toward the swirling, electrified clouds of the Tyrell Rift. The Zelker frigates hesitated, their sensors struggling to penetrate the dense energy fields. Inside the ship, the crew worked frantically to keep the system stable. Shields are barely holding, Irina reported from the engineering bay. If we take another hit dash. We won't, Ethan interrupted. Kara, cut the engines and drift. The sudden loss of power sent the Solstice into freefall, its hull creaking as it disappeared into the nebula. The Zelker ships overshot their target, their sensors blinded by the rift's electromagnetic interference. When the danger passed, Kara powered up the engines again, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. I can't believe that worked. Neither can I, Ethan muttered. But we're not out of this yet. A final stand. The Solstice emerged from the nebula into the orbit of a barren, uninhabited planet. Ethan turned to the crew, his expression grim. This is where we make our stand. If Zelker catches up, we fight. If they don't, we bury this thing for good. Kara nodded. I'll prep the weapons. Ethan glanced at Irina. Are you ready for this? She swallowed hard, her fear replaced by determination. I'm ready. The crew worked quickly, deploying decoys and traps around the planet's surface. When the Zelker frigates reappeared, the Solstice struck first, using the element of surprise to disable one of the ships. The remaining 2 frigates returned fire, their weapons tearing through the atmosphere. In the chaos, Irina and Ethan slipped away in a small shuttle, carrying the ship's black box A device containing Irina's genetic data. They landed near an active volcano, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Are you sure about this? Irina asked, her voice shaking. Ethan nodded. It's the only way. Together, they hurled the black box into the molten lava. The device melted instantly, its dangerous secrets lost forever. A new beginning. With the black box destroyed, the Zelker frigates retreated, their mission failed. The crew of the Solstice regrouped, battered but alive. As the ship drifted through the safety of neutral space, Irina sat with Ethan in the lounge, her gaze fixed on the stars. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Ethan smiled, his hand resting lightly on hers. You don't have to thank me. You earned your place here, Irina. You're part of this crew now. For the first time in years, Irina felt a sense of peace. Her past still haunted her, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever the galaxy threw at them.